A huge downdraft in stocks here, the third broadest base sell-off that we've seen in the S&P, Carol, all year long.
Yeah, that's what I think is so notable, right? You know, often we've seen a split in the S&P 500 on a day of selling, but this is pretty broad-based. And if you look, it's been about 2.5 hours that we continue to see these major equity averages kind of hover along the bottom, try to rally, and kind of can't get there. So, yeah, it's pretty depressed going into the weekend.
Not a good day to debut a public company. I'm watching what's happening with CoreWeave, sort of serving as this bellwether to other companies that are on the sidelines. And it's flat right now, but a pretty disappointing showing for the company.
And really the question then becomes, guys, as you see the VIX tick up as well, is will that Wednesday be the clearing event for equities? And do we all breathe a sigh of relief? There are indications that the options market's kind of ignoring Wednesday to some extent and focusing more on Jobs Friday.
Yeah, absolutely here. You did see some elevation in the VIX right now, camped out just below 22. And we were speaking with the global president of SIBO earlier. He talked a lot about the complexion of the market. And you can just pull it up on your Bloomberg terminal here. You look at that put-call ratio. We're not really seeing panic. People are hedging, certainly, but not to any extreme that we've seen in other downdrafts in this market. It is red across the screen. You pick an index, most likely it was down. Probably the only saving graces you're going to find in the utility space, in the pharmaceutical space, and to a smaller extent, real estate. The Dow Jones Industrial Average losing more than 700 points on the day, or about 1.7%. The S&P 500 down more than 100 points, or about 2% on the day as we wait for these numbers to settle. 55.80 and change is roughly about where it's going to end the day. The NASDAQ Composite down almost 500 points, or 2.7%. Similar decline for the NASDAQ 100. The Russell 2000 is going to close out the day lower by 2%. All the major indices lower on the week.
All right, and just digging a little bit deeper, as we've been talking about in the S&P 500 here on this Friday, 411 names in the S&P 500 lower today, guys. 92 actually gaining ground, but again, as we've been talking about, pretty broad-based in terms of selling on this Friday. And
when you take a look at the eye map of the 11 S&P sectors on the day, only one of those sectors was in the green. Utilities posting up a gain of about 0.8% here on the day. Everything else was lower, and that includes some big downdrafts on the day and on the week. For a weekly basis, the one sector that dragged everything down, you can guess, that's tech. Tech sector down 3.6%. Communication services, which is basically tech as well, down 3.2%.
All right, a lot of red across the screen, which made it a little bit tricky when I was picking out some gainers. So lucky they actually stayed in the green. So AppLovin, this was a name Tim talked about yesterday. We saw about a 20% decline in the Thursday trade. Investors moved back into it at its highs, up more than 9%, finishing the day with a 4% gain. It was a top gainer in the NASDAQ 100, and I think the S&P 500, actually the NASDAQ 100 in today's session. We did see multiple analysts coming out defending the company following yet another short report from Muddy Waters. So again, that was an outperformer in today's session, a little bit of a bounce back. Rocket Lab, this one at its highs up about 7.5%, holding on to about a 1% gain here at the close. This is after the company was selected by the U.S. Space Force for a $5.6 billion program. Citi analysts said that was positive for the stock, no surprise. Again, so this was selected for its national security space launch Phase 3 Lane 1 program, the company putting that out in a statement. I should point out, stock down about 25% year to date, and about 13% of the company is shorted in terms of the float. W.R. Berkley, also an outperformer, up about 7.5%, but at its highs today up more than 15%, so about having that gain, but still finishing in the green. This one on news that Mitsui Sumitomo Insurance will buy about a 15% equity stake in the U.S. insurer. This one, by the way, it's a $27 billion market cap company, not something that we talk about a lot, but nonetheless, W.R. Berkley, an outperformer in today's session, Tim.
You had the hard job today finding the outperformers. I had the easy job. I'm going to go with just mega cap tech today for my first decliner on the day today. The Bloomberg Magnificent 7 falling 3.5% today. Everything in there was lower. Alphabet, Amazon, Meta Platforms, NVIDIA, Apple, Microsoft, and Tesla, all lower on the day. Let's also look at shares of Lulu, falling today by more than 14%. This after the company delivered a disappointing outlook for the year, citing concerns about consumer spending in the U.S. amid geopolitical worries and high inflation. Shares falling by more than 14% today. And finally, shares of Wolfspeed. absolutely cratering today, falling about 52%. The company is struggling to reach a deal with investors to refi its $575 million in convertible bonds that are due next year. The company's been working with JPMorgan Chase on the refi effort. That's according to people with knowledge of the matter who asked not to be identified, discussing private talks. It's a chip maker, once again down about 52% today.
All right, guys, I'm taking a look at yields. And where do you go if you're nervous, you're scared? Well, you go into the bond market. And we saw that in full swing pretty much all across the curve, the belly and the back end in particular, seeing yields lower by about 10 basis points. At its lowest level, you had the 10-year yield hitting a mid-January low. For perspective, though, guys, if I take a look at the quarterly move in the bond market for the 10-year, for example, we're down 31 basis points for the quarter. So it's quite interesting. On a weekly basis, we're kind of flat. Monthly basis, we're up a little bit. Quarterly basis, down 31 basis points. One other point to note, guys, we were talking about this earlier with the credit stress. So the market CDX, North American Investment Grade Index, that actually jumped. So we're starting to see that corporate bond spread widen out a little bit as the day continued.
And this gets us to the question of kind of where these catalysts are going to be to move this market in theory higher, whether it does become, I don't know, that April 2nd event. That is Wednesday. And we had Julian Emanuel on the program earlier, guys, who talked about this idea that in his view, he does think that could be a market clearing event, meaning the uncertainty now becomes certainty and you can trade around it. You also have earnings next week out of RH. And on Friday, you have that big jobless report, that monthly jobless report. Jobs report is what I'm trying to say, guys.
It's easy. Well said.
Yeah,
well said.
so
okay.
Hopefully it will contain
Maybe we're
jobs.
looking for some jobless
It'll be job
stuff.
full. How about that?
Hey, listen, there's a lot going on and a lot to keep track of. I think it's interesting what he has to say. And yeah, if the uncertainty is truly taken out, but if I don't know, 24 hours later after that happens, the president comes out and introduces something new or says, maybe I'll roll back. Like, I think that's the hard environment for folks who've got to put money to work, or if you're running a company at this point, to make decisions.
Okay, so right now on the S&P 500, we closed at 5580 today. That's basically higher than where we closed a little earlier in the month. If you go back to March 13th, 5521 was the low. We'll see what happens next week, but I think people would be concerned if we start to reach new lows in this session.
Back below our 200-day, too, though, right, in the S&P.
But do we get by the dips? That's the question. So JPMorgan Market Intelligence this morning said that retail was still buying the dip in some of the Mag 7 stocks, not in the same way that it might have done during other sell-offs, but they did buy Tesla, they did buy Nvidia, and some increased interest in Amazon. So there is still that there within the market.
Yeah, but it's interesting, too. I mean, I was looking at the CFTC data that came out today, and obviously this only goes through Tuesday, so it doesn't really reflect any of the sentiment for the last 3 sessions here. But you are seeing a lot of folks betting on a weaker dollar. You are seeing folks pull some chips off the table when it comes to their bets for a higher market. And we remember we came into this week with several key Wall Street strategists lowering their outlook for the S&P 500, including HSBC and a few others.
That's good. I want people to be more negative. Can I say that? Am I allowed to
No.
No, you can't.
Oops, I said it. No, but I do.
That goes against the code.
Okay, well, I broke the code.
Why so negative, Carol?
No, but I just think when everybody's so upbeat, it makes me always so nervous. And I think, realistically, there are some real challenges out there. And I think especially when you, again, get stuff from D.C. where you're not quite sure, okay, is this it? Can we kind of make decisions based off of it?
But I think that's what the really challenging part is, as we talked about yesterday. Liberation Day next week, as the president has been calling it. What happens on, April 2nd when he announces the details on these tariffs? Because what we've seen over the last couple of months is he's changed his mind pretty frequently. Yeah. And if world leaders say something to him, make comments about the border, for example, what they're doing in Canada versus what they're doing in Mexico, he could go back on it.
And we should point out, too, I mean, the uncertainty isn't just around Trump himself. We're still waiting to hear what Canada's retaliation is going to look like, what Mexico, if they're going to do anything. And then, of course, there's still the elephants in the room when it comes to China and Europe. And I think that could have a more outsized effect. We might get certainty here. Now, are we going to have certainty on the other side of the border?
Hey, guys, it can't be all bad because Scarlett Johansson and Colin Jost apparently just bought a Manhattan penthouse for $13 million.
Where? Let's go visit.
Park Avenue.
Oh, very fancy. I was kind of hoping Brooklyn, but that's cool.
Sure. I needed a little something. I'm just saying.
See, they found real estate, Romaine. It's very close for you now.
They're incredibly wealthy. So I assume they don't have a 7% mortgage.
I'm assuming so. All right, guys, have a good and safe weekend. We'll see you next week.